Hello everybody, my name is Star Raptor, and I'm doing something a little bit different this time around. Usually I review a Star Wars novel, but instead I'm doing a spoilers discussion on Rogue One, a Star Wars story. This is written by Alexander Freed. The reason why I'm doing just a spoilers discussion is because this book is exactly like the movie, except for a couple scenes and a couple extended dialogue parts, which is basically what this is going to be targeting. But yeah, so obviously, spoilers. If you guys haven't seen Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, what are you waiting for? Go and check it out. I also have my review up on my channel, so make sure you watch that as well to see what I thought. So yeah, this is written by Alexander Freed, who also wrote Battlefront Twilight Company, which I felt like not enough people read. There was not enough buzz about that novel. Go and check it out, guys. It's basically about the rebellion around the time of the destruction of the first Death Star and moving up into events a little bit after Empire Strikes Back. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about this novelization in broad strokes. So things I really enjoyed was, first off, the character development. You really get inside all these characters' heads, like Cassian, Baze Malbus, Jyn Erso, Galen Erso, Orson Krennic. So it's cool because you get to see their motivations, what they're thinking about, which obviously watching the movie we don't know. So certain actions and stuff that happen in a movie, we now can understand why they did them to begin with, which we might have been questioning. You just learn more about the environments. It just connects where Catalyst left off. Another novel. You could check my review out for that as well. This picks up pretty much right after Catalyst. People out there actually saying there's a Death Star book trilogy. So it's like you go read Catalyst and you read Tarkin, then you read this, and it's like the Death Star trilogy. So I think that's kind of cool. I really liked how they have these kind of interlude sections now in this. Similar to Aftermath and Ahsoka, it's basically, for instance, we'll have like rebel reports of like a Death Star weakness in like an email form. At the end of the book, there's Mon Mothma doing a eulogy kind of for Jyn. Different things about Galen trying to get past the exhaust ports for the Death Star for its weakness through like the command of the Empire. So there's a like, and they're in really cool formats, like they're basically like emails. So I found that really cool because it really digs into a deeper part of the lore and universe. Another thing I really enjoyed was about Jyn. She had this kind of metaphorical thing going on in her head with the whole cave where she was trying to like climb out of this dark cave, similar to what she was in that little prologue that we see her when the movie first opens up. I think it's pretty much that. And as the story goes on, she starts to get more hope. It starts to become lighter, and there's a light that kind of shines and helps guide her. And I thought that was a really interesting way of like really explaining where her character is. Alright, so that's pretty much in the broad strokes of what happened. We get extended scenes, more dialogue on the characters, and some brand new scenes. So I'm going to move into specific details, kind of go in like chronological order for you guys. So the first thing I want to talk about is there is this whole new shuttle scene between Galen Erso and Orson Krennic. So as soon as basically Orson orders to kill Lyra, they bring her body back on them to his shuttle, and he says that they're going to have some kind of funeral on Coruscant. And it's really crazy because the whole time Galen's sitting there, and you know, he's looking at his wife dead, and Orson Krennic is, you know, this is when he turns from being a friend of Galen to be just a oppressor at this point, and he is not gonna let Galen out of his sights again. He's gonna, you know, put this guy to work hard. You know, playtime's over with, and he's gonna get stuff done. But at the same time, you see that Krennic actually did take Lyra's body back with him. So he does have like some empathy, but at the same time, he's the one that ordered the death. But yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting for his character. Another thing I want to talk about is on the Ring of Catherine between Cassian Andor and Tivik. Apparently, Tivik was part of Saul's army, and he was there to steal ammo for Saul's army. I just want to learn more about Ring of Catherine in general, guys. Like, I think it's such a cool place. It's not really a planet, but it's like an asteroid with these. Well, you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. I think it's just really cool design for sure. And it goes over the thought process of Cassian killing Tivik. Like, a lot of people have speculated, like, and it's shown pretty evidently in the movie that he had to kill the guy in order to save himself. But they just go into, like, inner turmoil in Cassian's mind. It just makes it even more satisfying of a part in the movie. Another thing I want to talk about is there is like a connection between the X-Wing VR mission and basically this novel. So they do reference that when they break Jin out of Wabani, the prison, they're leaving in a damaged U-Wing, and that's kind of where that little X-Wing VR mission takes off. So that's really cool, even if it's a little VR 15-minute experience, and you can see how it perfectly lines up in canon. I really dig that stuff. Another thing I want to talk about is how Krennic is so paranoid with Tarkin, because Tarkin is trying obviously to take over the Death Star. And the first scene between Tarkin and Orson Krennic, Tarkin basically goes back to the Death Star and inspects everything. And it talks about Krennic, about him having spies to spy on Tarkin. And it's just really interesting because it gets more about how important this is to Krennic. Like, he cannot fail. And he needs to make sure that the Emperor sees how useful of a person he is. And, you know, in the movie, he's always saying, like, oh, you know, I want to see the Emperor. And he's going to Vader and trying to get Vader's, you know, trying to appeal to Vader to see the Emperor. And we know how that goes. Moving on, though, I want to talk a little bit about this flashback that is in, you know, on Coruscant. They actually fleshed out a little more. They actually have a little dialogue between Lyra and Orson Krennic, and they actually do name drop Malpaz, which is a planet from Catalyst that is basically the first proving ground for this laser that they were developing on the Death Star like a year after the Empire's formation. So it's cool. We get those tidbits. So like I said before, this really feels like a continuation from Catalyst and going right into this novel. And I remember after Catalyst finishing that, like the last page says like continue the story in the Rogue One novelization, and that was really true. Going from those two authors, James Luceno to Alexander Free, I really felt like those guys must have talked a little bit to see what they were doing as far as connective tissue. Okay, so another scene I want to talk about specifically is one of those little interludes that I mentioned in the beginning of this. So there is one between Tarkin and Krennic, and there's this communique that's going between them, and it's basically like Tarkin getting on Krennic saying like, look, we're using this as full military force. So Tarkin sees this thing as like a weapon through and through, whereas Krennic is using it more as like a weapon of fear, a monument to the Empire. So I thought that's interesting. You have these two high-ranking Imperial officers, and they both have different ideals and ideas for what is the Death Star in their mind. Something I really thought was interesting was the scene on Jeddah between Bodhi Rook and the Bogut, as Saul Guerrero likes to call it. So you really get into his mind when this thing is like using its tentacles on his mind. It actually goes into his mind, and he's thinking about his mother and his pilot mentor for the Imperials. So it's cool because we get more backstory on Bodhi Rook. He really loved his mother. He was kind of a family guy. You know, he just was in the wrong field, basically. The wrong employer employed him, kind of thing. Okay, so another scene I want to talk about is Cassian and Jin. And Cassian, this whole book, is having this whole kind of mental battle between should he kill Jin or should he just kind of team up with her, because at one point they're on Jeddah and he got the pilot, so technically he doesn't need Jin anymore. So he's thinking, oh, should I just leave her for dead at this point, or just kill her and I won't have to deal with anything ever again. So it's interesting. Like, Cassian for me was one of my favorite characters in Rogue One, probably my favorite actually, just because you could tell he had this inner conflict going on, and it just felt like so much more of a deeper character, and we are getting a little more tidbits in this novel, and I really hope we get something down the line, like maybe a comic. I actually put this out there on one of my Star Wars Facebook groups that I'm part of, saying, hey, let's get a Marvel comic between K2SO and Cassian in the early days of the Rebellion. I would love that, but I digress, so I'm going to move on. Another thing I really liked was the scene where Jin is talking to an old woman in Jeddah, and she's basically hinting at like the backstory of Jin a little bit with her, like with her old comrades, because she asks this lady, you know, what happened to so and so, what happened to so and so, and she's starting to feel sympathy, and it's just how it is in war. Like, you lose your people, it's just something you have to deal with, and that to me helped me like understand more of, you know, what she's going through. And something that really touched me the whole time was Jin approaching Saul Guerrero. Now, Jin in the movie, you know, you could see that she has some resentment, but in the novel here, she has a lot of hatred I never really knew she had. Well, if you think from her perspective and she thinks about this, like, he left her for dead at 16. Like, not even a word about it. He just up and left, and now she's, trying to pick up the pieces of her life and try to grow on in this crucial time of her life at 16. So she's coming back to him, and she is doing everything she possibly can, holding herself back from trying to kill this guy. And she's like literally yelling at him pretty much and saying like, fight me, and she sees him as this old pathetic man and is at the end of his life. He's got, half his body is cybernetic, and it's just like Darth Vader actually. So I thought that was really touching, because then you hear Saw Gerrera in the movie and in the novel, obviously, talking about, are you here to kill me? Is the rebellion sending you here to assassinate me kind of thing? Because he's been on the exile kind of for a while now. But yeah, I really, really like that scene. Something I want to mention about is this awesome scene where it's basically all these different characters experiencing the destruction of Jeddah, being on the planet at the same time. So we have this old woman who, even in her 90s, is not ready to go. Then we have this other character, and this one really meant a lot, it's this little girl, the same girl that she saves in that Jeddah ambush. She's with her father, and it's really from her father's perspective, but, her mother is gone out to work, I guess, that day, and the girl is playing with the toys, and the father's just kind of watching her. And then basically it talks about, him picking her up, and she never felt a thing, and he never felt a thing. That was like really sad to read that, just seeing that the family hugging each other while their demise is upon them. Another thing that was really interesting was seeing the perspective of the troopers that were actually left on Jeddah getting destroyed by their own weapons. So basically what happens was Krennic had to do this test, and Tarkin was on his ass about, like, we're going to do a test on Jeddah. They had like evacuated 97% of the Imperials off that planet, and the other 3% I guess weren't close enough to their transports to make it off. So Krennic knew in advance he was going to be killing quite a bit of Imperial forces, and it didn't seem like he had much of a problem with it. So there you go, another layer behind Krennic. But it was interesting because you see these troopers on the ground. This female squad leader and her two squad mates. She's trying to call for extraction. And you could just tell, like, the guy on the dispatch was like, look, we got our orders, I'm sorry, and the next thing you know, they just get vaporized. So, and that was, and you just see the cloud of dust too, like, there's no way out of that, they're just gonna be dead. Going back to Saw, actually, I did like the perspective of, when you really think about it, Jyn has been with Saw Gerrera longer than she was with her own biological father. I think if you want to do the math, she was with Galen for about 6 years before she was taken by Saul, who had her for 8 years. So in her mind, like, Saul is pretty, and she went over this in her mind, like, Saul is pretty much a father to her. So she was taken away from her real father, and then now she's kind of leaving her father behind, Saul Gerrera, because she's got to leave him because he's accepting his own fate. Okay, guys, so to me, this is the most tantalizing fact that I read about anything in this novelization. Was there is this one part about midway through in the novelization, Cassian Andor is thinking back to the days. He is really distraught. He's got depression of some sort, some kind of mental instability, because at one point he's thinking back to the days when he was staring down the barrel of a charged blaster, and he was even like contemplating like wiping K2SO's memory, because as K2SO put it, he would be compromised to doing anything if it got out that he was trying to commit suicide, or at least thinking about it. It might not be that much of a shock when you think about it, because, he is a ruthless guy. He's working for Rebel Intelligence. He's got to do his thing, and if that means killing people in cold blood to, make the rebellion succeed, he's got to do that. But you think about it, like, literally that stuff weighs down on you, and it's evident in this novel that there's decisions he makes that he's still thinking about every freaking day. So, you got to give it to him. That I really, really liked that, actually. That was something we haven't really seen too much in Star Wars. Somebody that's really contemplating suicide. I mean, it's a terrible thing to think about it, but again, it adds another layer to his character. Okay, another thing that was really interesting, guys, was Krennic was actually planning on keeping Galen on Edu. Remember, he assassinated all of his scientist friends? he did that as a show of force to Galen to say, look, I killed your wife, all your scientist friends, if you don't do anything else, out of line, if you do anything else out of line, you're next. But, in the back of my mind, he kind of needs him, and, the X-Wings obviously ruined that fact with him being dead. Another thing I want to talk about is Galen made changes to the exhaust port about 18 months prior to the events of Rogue One. So he gave basically, and this is one of those interlude transmissions he was doing between this Imperial Overseer and Krennic, and he actually had like 3 different options for this reactor, because it was the reactor that he messed with, and then in order to exploit that, he gave them 3 options, and it was like, and one of them was the exhaust port. So it was going back and forth, and Krennic was the one who actually said, okay, we'll put the exhaust ports in there for you. So, yeah, if you think about it, and this wasn't mentioned in the movie, one of those really cool tidbits, Krennic was the man responsible to confirming to allow the use of the exhaust ports. So, yeah, you can thank Krennic really ultimately for those stupid plans. Another scene that wasn't actually in the movie was a scene between Mon Mothma and General Draven, who is the Imperial intelligence guy. They were talking about the peace negotiations with the Empire, because from the perspective of Mon Mothma, she ultimately wanted to make peace with the Empire, because at that point the Senate and the Empire is still a thing, even though it's really, Palpatine pulling the strings. But her one mission, Operation Fracture, which was the whole thing for getting Galen back, and she wanted to get Galen back to basically testify, and that would be their key to putting Palpatine out of power finally, and putting somebody else in his shoes. But unfortunately they can't do that because the X-Wings killed him, so now that's it. And there's no more peace, at least that they can see for a foreseeable future. So that's when they called in this council to meet, which is what we see in the movie. So another thing about this novel is we did get the confirmation of Vader's castle being on Mustafar. I don't know why they were so secretive about it, especially even in the Ultimate visual guide. They had a picture of it, but they still didn't name it. Obviously, they didn't name it in the movie. But yes, rest assured, it is Mustafar. And what's really cool about this is at the end of the scene between Krennic and Vader, Krennic is walking to a ship, and that little aide guy, I forget what his name is, but he did say that, Krennic is one of the very few people that has left Vader's castle and lived to tell the tale. Like, so, and Rebels, if you guys watch Star Wars Rebels, the end of Season 1, they talked about Mustafar, and they said that's where the Jedi go to die. So, I guess Vader brings these guys back there and just slaughters them and just builds up his hatred. We can make speculation on what he does, what actually happens in his castle. And I can go on and on about Vader's castle, because that was one of my favorite things about Rogue One. Just seeing that thing and being super surprised about where that was and like what he was doing there. And I hope that's not the last we see of it in the Star Wars universe. Hopefully we go back there in episode 8 or 9 or a show or comics at least. So yeah, really cool. We also get another scene where Jyn is dreaming of Saul, of Galen, of Lyra, and Lyra gives her motivation to make this choice to ultimately be loyal to the rebellion and see things through to the end, because it was her father's dying last wish to say, we need to get these plans and destroy the Death Star now before it is too late. So okay, we get this little tidbit that Jyn was promoted to sergeant from this one soldier named Cephala, only because the rebels wouldn't really I guess adhere to somebody that was commanding them without a rank. So this guy somehow just like gave her a rank. I thought that was kind of weird. So it's like I'm choosing to talk about it because there's a couple action figures like the one I have of her on that rock. It's called Sergeant Jyn, but we never really ever get like anything in the movie, any reference to her being a sergeant at all. So they throw it in the novelization. That's kind of what this is for. Another thing that's really not fleshed out in the movie is what Krennic is trying to do to get the leadership of the Death Star back, because we know he is, has that taken away from Tarkin. But Krennic also had this other plan the whole time. He was trying to use the explanation of Tarkin let the spies get off of Jeddah because he didn't have a blockade after the Death Star, started pulverizing. So that's his one, little thing of hope to bring to, I guess, the Emperor to say, look, I need command. He's not worthy because he let those guys out to get the plans to begin with. So it's really him that's responsible. So that's kind of cool. And another little tidbit is Draven. General Draven is actually leaving the base 1 on Yavin to go look for another base. Maybe he's the guy that finds, you know, the one on Hoth. You know, I really don't know. Okay, so Mon Mothma also goes and is getting out of Yavin. They actually explain why she leaves Yavin, which would mean why she's not in A New Hope. It's at this point that there's like too many people that she thinks know of the location. They can't have all their top dignitaries and leaders on one planet in case, God forbid, the Empire finds out they're there. Then they're all dead. So obviously she's got to get out there. She's got to get out of there a little bit earlier. A couple tidbits that I was really fascinated by are at one point Tarkin is thinking about, you know, ultimately taking out Scarif, right? But he's a little bit hesitant because there's a couple other developments that are happening concurrently on Scarif. As we know, it's like the Imperial's research center. So he's thinking about this thing called War Mantle and this other thing called the Stellar Sphere projects. You know, he was saying that they would have setbacks. So I'm thinking in my head, like, what could these be? Also, that was mentioned is something called Black Saber, and immediately my mind goes to Rebels. You know, with Sabine that now holds that the Black Saber. So that'll be interesting if that means that. Something that really hit me hard, and this goes with every character, is all the characters' last parts before they die in this novel. Oh man, they're hard to get through, especially K2SO. You get a perspective of his final stand from his character, and he's just like trying, and it's interesting because he's a droid. He thinks like a droid, obviously. So there's a lot of numbers going through his head. He's trying to allocate certain percentage of his processors to do certain things while he's trying to save Cassian. So, and at the very end, he's trying to save that last percent of his processor to just visualize Cassian, his master, or not even his master, whatever you want to, his partner, his chances of survival. So he's putting off all these other life-saving things just so in his little droid memory banks, I guess you could call him, he's thinking about, you know, his friend leaving and getting out of their life. I thought that was really something else. Something interesting I found out about Shirin Imwe is that he uses this martial art type of thing called Zima Shiwo, and it basically like slows his heart rate down among other things, and it actually puts him into this like Zen kind of thing, and that's when he chants like, I am one with the Force is with me, and he almost like gets this like sensation where he's able to feel more in tune with what's going on around him, hence why he's able to fight so well and shoot things up so well as he is. That to me was interesting, getting to know more about him. He's not really Force sensitive, but the way that this is described is it's kind of like parallel to be Force sensitive. Again, they're not Jedi, so they're not really using that term, but it's interesting nonetheless. Okay, so another thing that was really interesting was right at the end, Krennic is looking at the Death Star, and that thing is firing its laser beam, and one of the last thoughts in his head was, oh man, I was responsible for putting in those exhaust ports. And then he starts cursing everybody like Jin and Cassian and Tarkin and all those guys, and he's dead. And one last thing I want to talk about is, you know, Cassian and all the other characters, basically they're ready for their death. It seems like they're ready. They did their one thing and they're just ready. They're welcoming death. They knew this was a suicide mission, but they had to get the job done for all their other friends and buddies to, you know, have a chance against the Empire. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers like everything new and everything I kind of got knowledge from in a novelization. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for my Rogue One, A Star Wars Story spoilers discussion video. Let me know how I did in the comment section below, or just if you want to talk more about the spoilers, feel free to do so. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel so you never miss another video. I have tons of Star Wars content, including tons of stuff about Rogue One, so make sure you check them out. I'm Star Raptor. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you always. So, did you like the video? Then make sure you rate it a thumbs up, and if you did that, go over there, hit that Star Raptor head so you subscribe to my channel. Doing so will keep you up to speed on all of my latest content. Speaking of which, you can see a couple of my recent uploads down below. I'm also on social media, so what are you waiting for? Let's start nerding out.